Dr. Chalabi, if you get conflict with Iran, what happens to oil?
My God. It depends
Price?
on the extent on the, of the conflict. I mean, if there's going to be any military action in the Gulf, then certainly you have about 22 million barrels a day that will be cut off. Prices will go
we've
up.
come back to this question of the overspill and how this impacts on all the other conflict in the region. Can you connect with the sectarianized, with the sectionalized Iraq that we've got, the influence of Iran? Where do you go?
Well, I think the language of saying that Iran and the Shia overran the region is just not really correct. With respect to the professor, what happened was it was quite clear at the end of the first Gulf War that Iran was going to emerge as a major power in this region. It was a result of that war, not something that just happened that they overran the region. And of course that was reconfirmed. But I agree with what the audience were all saying. I mean, historically, we have always leveraged sectarian and ethnic identities in order to allow the colonial power to have a better control over the situation. I think it's going to have a big political impact, not quite the one that perhaps the United States hoped it would have, because in a sense, I think it's discredited, first of all, the status quo. I think the positive aspect is there will be a huge demand for change, and you can see it happening throughout the region. The old systems are going to go, and we will see a new system, and I think the ethnically based nation state is on its way out. We'll see probably an Islamist organizational policy.
Well, now, Ambassador Majali made the point that a very sectarian, divided country has been rendered by what has happened over the last 5 years, and one which is rejected by most Iraqi exiles in particular. And I described in the street in Damascus Sunnis and Shias living together. I keep coming back to the same question, that somehow that genie has to be got back into the bottle before much progress can be made, because clearly a lot of the fighting is in that domain.
John, as soon as the Americans get out, and they should get out as soon as possible, believe you me, that genie will disappear. It pays the Americans. About 1.5 years, 2 years before the invasion, they talked about Shia and Sunnah. Nobody discusses Shia and Sunnah in Iraq. We've never done that.
Well, you've raised something which nobody else has raised yet, and that is what actually happens. Can you risk the Americans leaving?
Yes, we can. Let them get out. Let them leave us our own problems.
If they really want a resolution, they should really give up supporting this political process at all.
Well, right? What do you replace it with?
All right, and help Iraqis in selecting their nationalist people, representative people.
Can they do that in a situation in which they're so divided?
Yes, of course, because, I mean, in a short time, those reasonable people, the nationalist Iraqi people, right, Iraq is full of them. They can reunite the groups, and then, of course, that will make a sense that if the American declare that they will leave the country, according to the table, according to time, or they leave as soon as possible.
Right.
The Iraqis lived 6,000 years before the Americans, and they could do it now and after. You asked me about Jordan, what they did to the Iraqis. They give shelter for the Iraqis for 600,000 of them, health care, housing, exemptions from visa fees.
But take me forward. What influence can you now bring to bear on the situation?
If the Americans let the Arabs interfere for good services and the Arab Leagues for good services, this would help. There should be balance. Okay, Iran,
well, there's going to be a summit in Damascus of the Arab League. I mean, do you have any confidence they will produce anything?
This is not enough. When we sent our ambassadors, they were bombed there. When we sent the Arab League there, they refused them. And when the UN sent Al-Ibrahimi to mediate, they refused to accept his mediation. They want their own policies. And,
right.
and it's proved that their policies are wrong up to now.
No.
It is catastrophic on the Iraqis.
I agree with very much what he saw. I saw the Soviet Union fail in Afghanistan, and the longer it tried to stay, the worse it got, the more they discredited that which they were there to help. Clearly it helps to leave, but I think the prospects of America leaving are very remote because of Iran.
No, I just want to come back to you. Yes.
Can I say something? You know, after destroying my country, the Americans shouldn't just leave.
I mean, how can you destroy a country and just leave? They owe it to us to reconstruct the country, to rebuild, to
that's what our ambassador in Baghdad says
compensate
he's doing.
every Iraqi. Millions of Iraqis have been killed, destroyed. Our infrastructure has been destroyed.
Let me just come to you.
I mean, just cannot leave like that.
Yes.
Your thoughts?
Well, you mentioned, I'm just going to go back a bit to, you're talking about the human capital in Iraq, and you're comparing that to the oil capital, and you described the oil as the most valuable resource in Iraq, and
but I certainly meant to say that you are the most valuable resource, and I'm sorry, alas, the clock in London, but not here in Amman, has defeated us. But we will talk more, and I want to thank you all very, very warmly for coming in. We've accepted that there is terrible work to be done, but there is hope that it could be done if people will pull together. I'm afraid there we have to leave it. That's it from Iraq Week on Channel 4 News. We're back tomorrow, 6:45. Until then, and if only we had more time to talk, from all of us here in Amman, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
There's a warning tonight that a huge increase in heroin production in Afghanistan is causing an international drugs emergency. The UN says the country is now supplying more than 90% of the world's opium.
Recession is looming and shares are getting flat. With the price of oil at new record levels, British Airways has warned its annual fuel bill will soar by a fifth. That sent share prices tumbling, sparking more gloom about the economy. Gordon Brown has insisted military personnel should be encouraged to wear their uniforms in public after staff at an RAF base near Peterborough were advised last year to stay in civvies for fear of attracting threats.
Now then, in the constant struggle between advances and setbacks in Iraq, today US forces were dealt a dual blow. 5 American soldiers on foot patrol were killed by a suicide bomb attack in Baghdad. It was the deadliest attack on American forces since the end of January. On the same day, a female suicide bomber killed a prominent Sunni Arab tribal chief who led a local security force fighting against al-Qaeda in the volatile province of Diyala. Earlier, I spoke with our correspondent Hugh Sykes in Baghdad for more on today's attacks targeting US troops.
A majority of people worldwide oppose tougher measures to deter Iran from developing its controversial nuclear program. That's according to a new BBC poll. More than 30,000 people in 31 countries were surveyed about how governments and the United Nations should deal with Iran if it continued to produce nuclear fuel in defiance of the UN Security Council resolution. Compared to results from a June 2006 BBC poll, support for the use of military strikes or economic sanctions has declined significantly.
Well, the US Army in Iraq says 8 of its soldiers died in separate attacks yesterday. One of the worst days for American forces for months. 5 US soldiers on foot patrol in the capital died in a suicide bombing. Another 3 soldiers were killed by a roadside bomb north of Baghdad. Almost 4,000 American troops have been killed in Iraq since the invasion.
The man in charge of American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan has resigned after a magazine suggested he was opposed to any military action to stop Iran's nuclear program. Admiral William Fallon said he was going because the row was getting in the way of America's mission in the Middle East. When you look at how things have turned out in Iraq, here we are 5 years on, do you feel any sense of embarrassment or even guilt?
Me, myself?
Yes.
I am deeply sorry about each of the individual lives, Iraqi and American, that have been lost. And I do feel that we could have executed the war more intelligently and in a better prepared fashion. To that extent, extra lives have been lost, and I feel deeply, deeply sorry about that in every way.
But you and Mr. Chalabi did everything you could to encourage the Americans in the belief that not only was this a right war, but that it was a very easily winnable war, and that the peace would not be anything like as bloody as it's turned out to be. Don't you have that on your conscience?
Well, I think in the first instance it was easily winnable war, and that there was very little combat and very few lives on either side were lost. And I do believe strongly that the establishment of a formal occupation has led very directly to the establishment of the insurgency that we have seen. And I think a direct transfer of control to an Iraqi provisional government, much as was done in Afghanistan, would have gone a long way towards limiting the type of resistance that has grown in Iraq.
Let's get more now on the 5th anniversary of the beginning of the Allied invasion of Iraq. The town of Fallujah, for so long the power base of the insurgents, has been the scene of some of the heaviest fighting. The BBC's World Affairs editor John Simpson returns to see what has changed. His report does contain some graphic images.
It's just a short hop by helicopter from Baghdad to Fallujah, but it's still the only safe way to do the journey. For most of the 5 years since the invasion, Fallujah has been a frightening, hostile place. It's still a closed town. You need a special pass to get through all the roadblocks. Now, though, the Americans have changed their tactics.